Didn't know tonight's gala hired actresses from the hood. You're playing that janitor role a bit too well, sweetheart. Mike Whitmore's voice, soaked in Chardonnay and arrogance, cut through the clink of silverware and soft jazz like a shard of glass. Sarah John Peter didn't flinch, not when the hedge fund titan's laughter rolled across the ballroom, not when heads turned toward her with a mix of amusement and discomfort. Her hand still gripping the mop paused mid-stroke over the marble tile of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom in downtown New York. She had cleaned worse. She had endured worse. But tonight wasn't just another paycheck. Tonight was supposed to be the last shift before she quit this job, before she tried again to revive the dream she'd buried under layers of bleach and overtime, to return to accounting to reclaim her identity beyond a pair of latex gloves. Sarah had been invisible for so long, she nearly forgot how it felt to be seen until now, until Mike's snide comment forced the whole room to see her not as a professional, not even as a human, but as a stereotype. She kept her head down and continued scrubbing the floor, deliberately ignoring him. She thought that if she didn't react, the moment would pass. But Mike wasn't finished. He took a few steps closer and chuckled loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. You know, I've seen this setup before. A little social experiment. Right rich guy meets the hot misunderstood maid. Am I supposed to feel guilty now or excited? The laughter from the nearby tables grew quieter, more nervous now. Sarah straightened, refusing to meet his eyes. But he wasn't done. You're not on the clock later. Are you? I've got a suite upstairs. How much for the rest of the night? He held up a folded $100 bill, like it was a tip for good service across the room, beneath the glow of chandeliers and champagne flutes. People began to whisper. A few chuckled nervously. Others looked away. No one intervened. No one told Mike to shut up, of course. Not this was his playground. His name was etched into the donor plaque outside his money-built wings of this hotel, hospitals, museums. Sarah was a blur in the background of his world. Mike lifted his glass again. Tell me, how much do they pay you per hour for that act? Or is this your side gig? The mopping muse. Sarah finally stood upright. Her uniform was still damp from the bleach water, and a soft sweat beaded at her hairline. She looked Mike in the eye, calm but steely. Then with quiet dignity, she said, I'm not a part of this event. I'm cleaning up after it. But you just spilled more than wine tonight, sir. You exposed exactly who you are. Mike's smirk twitched. Sarah turned to leave her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. No one applauded, but no one laughed either. That night, Sarah walked home to the south side of New York, where sirens lulled children to sleep and streetlights flickered like old film. Her building was a brick-worn complex with rusted mailboxes and a stoop that sagged from too many forgotten promises. Inside, her mother, Marlene, stood over a pot of instant mac and cheese. The fluorescent light above the stove flickered as she stirred. How was the gala, baby? Sarah forced a smile. Same as always. Marlene didn't press. She never did. They had both grown used to swallowing indignities whole like bitter medicine. But later that night, as Sarah scrubbed the bleach from her fingernails, she couldn't stop replaying Mike's face. The casual cruelty, the way people laughed, the way no one, not even the manager, defended her. She picked up her phone and opened a job site, scrolling past listings she'd already applied to accounting positions, all requiring 5 years of experience. Referrals from senior partners, CPA license preferred her degree. Hard-earned from Illinois State now felt like a relic from another life. The next morning, she returned to the cleaning agency's office to confirm her next shift, but instead the receptionist handed her a folded slip. We won't be needing your services anymore. Sorry, Sarah didn't ask why she didn't have to. Mike's reach was long. She left the building with her chin high and stomach hollow that afternoon. Her friend Mark, former hotel coworker turned receptionist, called her to meet up at a neighborhood diner over greasy fries and watery coffee. Mark leaned in. That man, he's done this before. Women in service uniforms, maid servers. He flirts with some others. He humiliates, but everyone's too afraid to push back. Sarah stirred her coffee. Why, he's just a man. No, Sarah, he's money. He's connections. He's lawsuits and silencing. He's the guy that gets you blacklisted in under 10 minutes. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Well, he succeeded. I'm out of work and the rent's due next week. Maybe you shouldn't have spoken up, Mark said gently. You know how this city works. Ma's eyes narrowed. That's exactly why I had to. That night Mia opened her laptop and typed, Pruno Legal Help New York. A dozen results popped up. One name caught her eye. Raymond Harry, former public defender, now a civil rights attorney, who took on high-profile workplace discrimination cases. She hesitated. 100 doubts crowded her thoughts. What if no one believed her? What if she lost everything? But then she remembered the look in Mike's eyes, that lazy malice, and she knew she had already lost something far more precious: dignity. She clicked the email button and began to type, Dear Mr. Harry, Shakurichin. She didn't know it yet, but that single message would trigger a chain of events that would shake one of the most powerful men in New York, and finally force the city to look at the woman it had tried so hard to ignore. The email sat in her drafts for an hour before Sarah finally hit send. She had read it 3 times, correcting grammar, deleting a sentence, then writing it back. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have the right legal tone, but it was honest. It told Raymond Harry that she wasn't rich, wasn't connected, and probably couldn't offer much in return. It told him what Mike Whitmore had said, what he had implied, what everyone else had let slide the next morning. Sarah was in the kitchen when her phone buzzed. Subject: request for legal help. Sarah, I saw the video. I believe you come by my office this afternoon. Bring anything you've got: photos, messages, your story. Let's talk, Raymond Harry. She exhaled, gripping the edge of the sink. The video someone had recorded. Mike's words posted it to social media, a blurry clip, 37 seconds long in it. Mike's voice was clear, arrogant, unmistakable. And there she was, back-turned, mop in hand, as he called her, a side gig. It had over 80,000 views. Now the comments were a war zone. Some outraged, others mocking, a few were worse. But in that moment, none of it mattered as much as the fact that someone had replied, someone powerful, someone willing to listen. By 300p. Sarah found herself in a narrow brick building on the west side, climbing the creaky stairs to Raymond Harry's office. A bell tinkled as she entered. Raymond stood to greet her. He was tall, black, early 60s, with silver at his temples, and a warmth in his eyes that calmed her nerves. His office smelled like old books and fresh coffee. Behind him, a faded photo of Martin Luther King Jr. hung next to a degree from Northwestern Law. You came, he said, motioning to a chair. I almost didn't. He smiled, but you did. That already makes you braver than most. She handed him a USB drive. Someone from the hotel staff slipped this in my bag the night it happened. I haven't listened to everything yet. Raymond plugged it into his laptop. The screen filled with audio files, some labeled by date, others just numbers. He clicked on one. She's just a cleaner. No need to overthink it. Besides, some of these girls want the attention. They just won't admit it. Sarah felt her stomach turn. That was Mike's voice. Raymond paused the file. This is good, very good, but we'll need more. He asked her to recount everything, the words, the reaction, the manager's silence, the termination. Sarah spoke slowly at first, but then it came in waves: the humiliation, the anger, the frustration at how little her degree had mattered in the real world. Raymond listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back and laced his fingers together. I can take this, he said, but you need to know this will be a war. I've lived in one my whole life. Sarah replied that evening. Sarah returned home with a folder full of legal forms and a notebook filled with scribbles. Her mother, Marlene, was waiting in the living room with a stack of bills and a quiet look in her eyes. Did you really meet with that lawyer? Marlene asked. I did. Marlene looked away. People like that man, they don't lose, they do. Sarah said, sitting beside her, they just need someone to make them. The next few days were a blur of meetings, forms, strategy calls. Raymond filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He also contacted 2 local news outlets, both of whom had ignored the story until now. Once they learned a prominent civil rights lawyer had taken the case, they suddenly showed interest. The video went viral. Sarah's name trended on Twitter. Hashtags appeared: number justice for Sarah, number Whitmore exposed, number voices of the invisible. But with visibility came backlash. Her phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, others venomous. At the grocery store, a stranger recognized her. You're the girl from the video, he said. You're lying for attention. She didn't respond, just kept walking at night. She barely slept. She started locking the windows. Every sudden noise felt loaded. But every morning she kept showing up at Raymond's office building, the case piece by piece. Then one morning Mark showed up unannounced. "I got fired," she said, voice shaking. "I think they know I helped you." Mia felt a cold knot form in her chest. "I'm so sorry." "Sana," she whispered. Mark shook her head. "Don't be. I'd do it again. But you better make this count, Sarah, for all of us." A week later, Raymond called her with a breakthrough. A former assistant of Mike's reached out. "She has emails and she's scared. Sarah met the woman 2 nights later in a quiet park outside the city. Her name was Linda. She was in her 50s, tired looking, but resolute. He called us trash with lipstick. She said said he liked hiring people who wouldn't fight back. She handed over a second USB drive, this one, with months of correspondence. It included memos instructing HR to avoid hiring outspoken women and references to payouts made to other women who'd threatened to sue. "I kept these," Linda said, "in case I ever needed to remember I wasn't crazy." Back at the office, Raymond clicked through the files. "This is it," he whispered. "We've got pattern intent suppression. This could be the cornerstone." Sarah felt something stir inside her. It wasn't hope, she wasn't ready for that, but it was close, maybe the beginning of it. As she left Raymond's office that night, the city lights shimmered against the pavement. Her reflection followed her in the glass of closed storefronts. She saw herself clearly, not a maid, not a victim, but a woman on the edge of something much bigger than herself. And she wasn't backing down. If you believe Sarah deserves to be heard, give her a like and don't forget to leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from. You never know, someone near you might be following this story too. The first time Sarah stepped into the ballroom again, it was through a different door, and with different eyes. She wasn't in uniform. No mop, no gloves, just a secondhand black, dressed as best she could, and a clipboard borrowed from Raymond's paralegal. It was enough to pass as temporary event staff. That night's gala was for a new medical research fund, a charity ironically hosted by the very man whose idea of charity was humiliation. Mike Whitmore hadn't noticed her, not yet. Sarah moved through the room like a shadow, quiet and efficient. She wasn't there to clean floors anymore. She was there to clean up something filthier. A legacy built on silence. At a corner table, she recognized one of the board members who had laughed the night she was mocked. He was smiling, drink in hand, arm around a young intern. Same game, new audience. She made mental notes. Who spoke to Mike? Who he brushed off? Who whispered too closely? Raymond had taught her that every pattern told a story backstage. She found the hotel's service corridor, where a few older custodians rested between shifts. One of them, a small Latina woman named Rosa, narrowed her eyes. "I remember you," she said in Spanish. "You're the girl from the video." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Rosa didn't scold. Instead, she reached into her pocket and handed Sarah a keycard. Storage room. 8th floor, he used to hold meetings there. "I've heard things, huh?" The room was dim, lined with shelves of catering equipment, linens, crates of wine. But Sarah wasn't looking for wine. She was looking for truth, tucked behind a stack of boxes. She found a paper file folder. Names, dates, employee complaints. Many marked with red ink, and the word "settled" one caught her eye. Yvonne Grant, former banquet server, accused Mike of misconduct. 5 years ago, the file ended abruptly back in Raymond's office. The next day, she laid out everything on the table. The audio, the USBs, Rose's key card, and the paper files. Raymond whistled. This isn't just one case anymore. This is a pattern, repeated, deliberate. They didn't just ignore this, they buried it. Misha's fingers tightened. How many other women had to walk away in silence? Raymond didn't answer. Didn't have to that afternoon. Sarah returned to her old neighborhood. The playground near her building was empty. Wind rattling the swings. A young girl, maybe 10, sat on the steps holding a school book. She looked up, curious. "Are you that lady?" "The one who said no to the rich man." Sarah smiled gently. "Yeah, I guess I am. My mama says you're brave." The girl added, "She said I should watch you." So Mia crouched down. "You should always speak up, okay, even if your voice shakes." The girl nodded solemnly. Later that night, Mia met with Linda again. They sat in the back booth of a small Ethiopian restaurant in Bronzeville, the kind Sarah's father used to take her to before he passed. Linda stirred her tea slowly. There's one more thing. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope inside. Were printed screenshots, direct messages, encrypted chats in them. Mike's assistant coordinated hush payments to various staff. There was even a line referencing, "Sarah, she won't last long. Cleaners are replaceable." Sarah stared at the words. He thought I'd disappear. "Most of us do," Linda replied. Raymond prepared the civil suit. The press was alerted. Sarah's story was going national by Thursday. She was booked for an interview on a late-night news segment. They'd blurred the worst parts of the video, but the sound was crystal clear before the segment aired. Raymond pulled her aside. "They're going to come after you." Now, not just him, his lawyers, his PR teams, maybe even his supporters. I don't care, you should. But that doesn't mean you stop that night. Sarah watched the segment air from her living room. Her mother sat beside her, eyes moist but proud. "They can say what they want," Marlene whispered. "But the whole world saw who you really are after the interview." Messages poured in, emails, voicemails, texts. Some women shared their own stories. A former intern, a retired housekeeper, even a current executive assistant using an alias. Each story different, but the wound was the same. One message stood out. It was from a man and anonymous, but the words were unexpected. "I used to laugh at jokes like his. I'm sorry, people like me helped him stay powerful. Not anymore. It wasn't much, but it was something." That weekend, Sarah walked past the Plaza Hotel, the same marble steps, the same golden doors. She didn't slow, she didn't stop, but just before crossing the street, she glanced back. The floor inside gleamed under the chandeliers. "I used to mop that floor with my tears," she whispered. Now she was about to mop the system that let it happen, and this time she wouldn't be doing it alone. 3 days after the interview aired, Sarah's world tilted again, this time with a knock at the door. It was just past 700 when she opened it to find two men in dark suits standing outside. They flashed credentials too quickly to be read. Said they were from the hotel's legal team and handed her an envelope thick with printed pages. "This is a cease and desist," one of them said flatly. "Any further public statements about Mr. Whitmore will be considered defamatory. You're being watched closely." Sarah didn't respond. She shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it, her breath coming shallow. Her mother emerged from the kitchen holding a half-filled coffee cup. Sarah, who was that? She held up the envelope. "Mike just made his first move." Raymond wasn't surprised when she called. "They want you scared. They want you quiet. That means we're hitting something real. Should I stop speaking to the press number? You keep going." But now we play smart, controlled, documented every step of the way. That same afternoon, Raymond filed an official counterclaim accusing Mike of witness intimidation. Then he did something that startled even Sarah. He called a press conference. It was held outside the federal courthouse, with a dozen reporters gathered beneath the gray winter sky. Raymond stood behind the podium, Sarah just behind him, her coat wrapped tightly against the cold. "The people you see behind me," Raymond said, motioning to the row of women flanking Sarah. "Former staffers, hotel workers, anonymous supporters, represent a story this country knows all too well, that power unchecked becomes poison." Shabihuri, cameras clicked. Sarah stood still, her face unreadable. "We are not seeking revenge," Raymond continued. "We are demanding accountability for every slur whispered behind closed doors, for every woman fired for telling the truth, for every silence bought with hush money." The moment made the evening news. Sarah's face, calm and centered, appeared beside headlines like "Hotel Empire Under Fire" and "Maid Becomes Movement." But the backlash was fierce online. Trolls escalated. A fake photo circulated claiming to show Sarah at a party in provocative clothing. It was clearly doctored, but that didn't stop thousands from sharing it. A radio host called her a gold digger with a victim complex. Commentators questioned her background, her motives, even her education. Raymond's office was broken into nothing, taken, just papers scattered, cabinets opened. "This is intimidation," Raymond said, classic playbook. "But we're not budging." One night, Sarah came home to find the front window shattered, a brick set on the living room floor, with a note taped to it, "Stop or else." Her mother cried. Sarah did not. She called the police, filed a report, and posted a photo of the brick on her social media with the caption, "This is what truth costs." Within hours, the post went viral. Celebrities shared it, activists reposted it, A local artist painted a mural of Sarah, holding a mop like a sword beneath it. The words, "She refused to clean the dirt," with silence. The mural stood just 4 blocks from the Plaza Hotel. Then came the surprise. A young tech entrepreneur named Jewel Medina contacted Raymond. She had once worked for Mike's firm, briefly as a junior analyst. "I lasted 6 weeks," she said. "He made me feel like furniture, decorative and disposable." Jules still had access to old email chains. She had saved them when she left, too angry to delete them. Some included internal discussions mocking Mia after the incident. Others detailed settlement tactics and discredit strategies against past accusers. Raymond and Mia met Jules in a quiet cafe. Phones off, booth cornered. "You don't owe us this," Mia said carefully. "I owe it to myself," Jules replied, and to the version of me that was too scared to speak. Then that night, Sarah reviewed the emails with Raymond, one in particular. Chilled her. It was from Mike's VP of Operations to an HR lead. "Let her come at us. We've got enough dirt to bury her. These girls always break. She will too." Raymond leaned back in his chair. The screen's glow, sharpening his features. "We take this public immediately," and so they did. The next morning, the largest newspaper in New York ran the headline, "Internal Memos Reveal Pattern of Abuse in Whitmore Empire." The subheading read, "Emails Suggest Coordinated Silencing, Legal Threats and Discrimination." The fallout was immediate. Shareholders pulled out, sponsors backed away. 2 nonprofits returned massive donations. Mike had made a board member from the hotel, resigned publicly, citing irreconcilable ethical concerns. Mike finally issued a statement, but it was vague, non-apologetic, and full of legal jargon. No admission of wrongdoing, just a passing nod to misunderstandings and media sensationalism. But the damage had been done that night. Sarah stood outside the hotel where it all began. Snow drifted through the air, softening the sharpness of the neon signs. She looked up at the windows of the ballroom, imagining the clink of glasses, the swirl of gowns, the hum of whispered slurs. Raymond had offered her a car home, but she had declined. "I want to walk." She'd said, "I need to remember what this feels like." And so she walked the city, unfolding around her, one silent block at a time. She thought about the little girl at the playground, about Linda, about Jules, about Rosa, with the key card, about every woman whose name she'd never know, but whose story echoed her own. She wasn't done, not yet, because this wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning. By the time Mike Whitmore's lawyers filed for a gag order, Mia was already in her 4th interview that week. CBS, NPR, a local talk show, and a women's justice podcast. Each one brought more attention, more scrutiny, more voices from the shadows. "I don't want to be a symbol," Sarah said into the podcast mic. "I want to be a person who wasn't afraid." Not this time. She was tired. Her face had become familiar in headlines. Her name was now shorthand for a conversation most people preferred to avoid. But she showed up again and again for herself, for the women who couldn't. Raymond called her one morning with a new development. "We just received a subpoena." Sarah sat up straighter. "From who?" "The state attorney general. They've launched a formal investigation into Whitmore's business practices." "Sarah, this is big." She blinked, trying to let the weight of that sink in. "Does that mean it's real now?" Raymond's voice softened. "It's always been real now. It's official." The news spread fast. By noon, it was trending. Whitmore Enterprises plummeted on the stock market. Anonymous employees began leaking more internal documents. One particularly damning report showed HR had a private flag list of employees labeled problematic, mostly women and mostly people of color. That night, Sarah and Raymond were invited to a town hall meeting hosted by a local coalition of women's rights groups. The auditorium buzzed with energy. Teachers, nurses, hospitality workers, all packed into plastic chairs beneath a flickering fluorescent light. Sarah stood on stage in jeans and a navy sweater. No makeup, no teleprompter, just her and a microphone. "I was supposed to disappear," she began. "That's how it usually goes. They count on silence. They build empires from it. They build careers, reputations, wealth. But silence isn't strength. Silence is the grave where truth goes to die." The crowd applauded, some stood. She continued, "I didn't fight this hard just to win my job back. I fought so the next Sarah won't be mocked, then fired, then followed home by fear. I fought because dignity isn't negotiable." Afterward, as she stepped down from the stage, an elderly woman in a church hat approached her. She wore pearls and walked with a cane. "Child," she said gently, placing a hand on Mia's arm. "We marched in '63, so women like you could stand tall today. You've made us proud." Mia's throat tightened. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak later that night in Raymond's office. They reviewed the growing list of supporting witnesses: 12 women, now some former employees, others contractors, two who had never even worked for Whitmore, but had encountered him at industry events. Raymond rubbed his eyes. "It's turning into a class action. And if we win," he paused. "If we win, Mike Whitmore becomes a cautionary tale. If we lose, you still change the world." The following week brought new tension. A counter-campaign launched online, led by conservative commentators. A fake profile claiming to be Mia's former roommate accused her of being a liar, an actress, a scammer. Another alleged she had been paid by political organizations. Raymond's office received 2 anonymous bomb threats. Police swept the building. Nothing found, but the message was clear. The stakes were escalating. Still, Sarah pressed forward. She met with community leaders, gave testimony before the state committee, and agreed to be featured in a documentary on systemic racism in corporate America. One evening, while walking to the store, a luxury car slowed beside her. The window rolled down. It was Mike. He wore sunglasses. Even though it was dusk, his voice was calm. "Too calm, you've made your point." Sarah didn't stop walking. "You think they love you?" he called after her. "They don't. They love a story, and when the story's over, so are you." She turned slowly. "You don't scare me," she said. Mike smiled coldly. "You should be scared. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah stepped closer to the curb. Her voice dropped low. "Neither am I. He sped off that night." She called Raymond. "He's watching me." "I figured he might." Raymond replied, "That's why I filed a restraining order yesterday, just in case." In the days that followed, something changed in Sarah. Her tone sharpened, her spine straighter. She no longer reacted with disbelief when people threatened or insulted her. Instead, she responded with clarity and law. She started hosting weekly community rounds in church, basement and libraries, places where women gathered without fear. She trained them on how to document workplace harassment, how to file complaints, how to preserve evidence. "I'm not a lawyer," she'd begin, "but I'm someone who got tired of scrubbing silence off tile floors." One evening after a session at a local community center, a teenage girl approached her. "I saw your video with my aunt." She said, "I want to be like you. I want to fight." "So," Sarah smiled, crouching to her level. "You don't have to wait. You start fighting the first time you speak up back home." She lit a candle and sat by her father's old record player. Aretha Franklin played softly. She reached for the scrapbook her mother kept hidden behind old cookbooks. Inside were her college acceptance letters, her first paycheck, a picture of her and her father at her graduation. She added a new clipping, the article with the headline, "From Housekeeper to Hero." Sarah John Peter fights back. The glue was barely dry when her phone rang. "Raymond, they're settling," he said. Sarah didn't move. "He's stepping down the boards, forcing it. They're offering a fund for former victims, a public apology, and they want to talk to you about joining the advisory council." She exhaled slowly. "What do you want to do?" Raymond asked Sarah. Looked at the article again. "I want them to say my name on camera. I want them to say they were wrong. Silence then will make them say it." Raymond said. Sarah didn't smile. She nodded. Because justice to her wasn't money. It was memory, it was change. And she wasn't done remembering the conference room was all glass and marble. Precisely the kind of space Sarah had once only entered, with a mop and a quiet presence. Now she stood in the center of it, flanked by Raymond on her right and 2 attorneys from the state on her left across from her. The board members of Whitmore Enterprises sat in stiff silence, their suits impeccable, their faces unreadable. Mike Whitmore was not present, his chair, though the one at the head of the table, remained conspicuously empty, a symbolic absence. Raymond had whispered earlier. "He's gone, but the damage remains." A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a tone that carried generations of corporate diplomacy cleared her throat. Her name was Caroline Blake, interim CEO, appointed just 4 days prior after the board's emergency vote. "Miss John Peter," she began on behalf of the executive leadership of Whitmore Enterprises. "We acknowledge that grievous errors were made. We recognize that multiple employees, including yourself, were subjected to behavior unbecoming of our company's stated values. Sarah listened without blinking. Caroline continued. We deeply regret the harm caused and accept full responsibility moving forward. We are establishing an independent oversight committee and a reparations fund. Additionally, we would like to formally offer you a seat on the advisory board for workplace equity and inclusion. Sarah took a breath. I appreciate the gesture, she said calmly. But before we talk about boards or funds or futures, I have one request. Caroline glanced at the others, then back at Sarah. Go ahead, I want it. Said plainly, Mia replied. I want someone here representing this company to say it out loud that what happened to me was wrong, that it wasn't a misunderstanding, that it was abuse, and that the silence that followed made it worse. The room tensed. Caroline hesitated. Then slowly she stood. You're right, she said, voice steady. What happened to you was wrong. It was systemic. It was humiliating and it was covered up. And for that, Sarah John Peter, we are sorry. Sarah nodded once. Thank you, that's the beginning. Later that day, a press conference was held outside the company's downtown headquarters. This time, Sarah stood behind the podium. She looked out at the crowd, journalists, activists, community members, former colleagues. Some held signs, some wore buttons with her name. When I started cleaning hotel floors, Sarah began, I never imagined I'd be here speaking from this place. But I did imagine justice. I imagined dignity. And I imagined a world where people like me aren't disposable. She told the story again, but this time as the narrator, not the subject. She spoke of Mike's remarks. The silence of bystanders, the threats, the insults. She spoke of Linda and Rosa and Mark, of Jules, of every woman who had once believed she had no voice. I didn't win a lawsuit, she said toward the end. I won back my name and now I'm using it. When she stepped down, the applause was thunderous. Some were in tears. Raymond put a steady hand on her shoulder. You just made history, he said. But Sarah didn't feel like a headline. She felt like herself, fierce, steady, unafraid. The following months moved quickly. Mia accepted the advisory role, and not because she trusted the board, but because she trusted her mission. She demanded full transparency, independent audits, and quarterly reviews. She insisted on hiring from communities that had long been excluded. She started a nonprofit too, the Second Voice Foundation. It provided legal aid and media advocacy for low-wage workers facing discrimination. Within 6 months, it had chapters in 4 cities. Her story became a case study in law schools. A journalism professor invited her to speak on truth in media. Sarah stood in front of young faces and said, always record, always document, but more importantly, believe yourself first. But justice was not without scars. Sarah still checked over her shoulder in dark parking lots. She still received the occasional anonymous email, ugly, threatening, vicious. She ignored them, but she never deleted them. They remind me why I do this, she told Raymond once. They're proof that the fight still matters. On the 1-year anniversary of her first public statement, Sarah returned to the ballroom. It was empty. She stood in the center, beneath the same chandelier, now dimmed for cleaning. She looked up at it, not in awe, but with clarity. She remembered the humiliation, the mop, the slurs, the laughter. And she remembered how she had stood still that night, refusing to cry, refusing to break. Now she whispered, you called me a side gig, a cleaner, a nobody. Then she smiled, and now I'm the one rewriting your policies. She pulled a folded paper from her Kawada flyer for her next town hall event. She placed it on the floor in the exact spot she'd once stood with a mop in her hands before she left. She turned around one last time. Say my name, she whispered into the silence, and this time it echoed back with power. Sarah John Peter, a name no longer whispered in contempt, but spoken with respect, with reverence, with justice. Mia's story had transcended headlines. It had become curriculum. Colleges began inviting her to speak not just as a guest, but as a voice of lived expertise. She never called herself an activist or a leader. She said, I'm just someone who got tired of being quiet. On a warm spring afternoon, she stood in the auditorium of Emory University in Atlanta. The seats were filled with students, faculty, and working professionals who had driven in from neighboring counties. Some held notebooks, others held hands. The anticipation was thick, but Sarah walked to the podium without notes. She opened with a memory. The first time someone called me a slur. I was 12. He was the son of my mom's employer. I said nothing. My mom said nothing. We just kept cleaning. And I thought, that's how you survive, but I was wrong. Silence isn't survival, it's submission. The room was dead silent, she continued years later, when a billionaire tried to make me feel like that 12-year-old again. I realized I had a choice not between speaking up or staying silent, but between being erased or being remembered. And I chose memory. Applause didn't erupt. It rippled quiet, heartfelt slow building from the front row to the back. People didn't just hear her, they felt her after the talk a young man approached. Her backstage, he wore a staff badge and introduced himself as Malik, a janitor at the university. His hands were rough, his posture respectful. I watched every one of your interviews. He said, I almost quit this job 3 times, but then I saw you, you make me walk taller. Sarah touched his shoulder. You deserve to take up space everywhere you go. She had learned that power doesn't always come with volume. It comes with persistence. And now she had allies, real ones. Professors, attorneys, clergy, small business owners. People who once stayed on the sidelines had begun to step in. One such person was Reverend Clark, a soft-spoken pastor from the south side of New York. He invited Mia to speak at his Sunday service in Old Brick Church, where the pews creaked and the gospel choir warmed the soul like sunlight through stained glass. Sarah took the pulpit in front of an audience that looked like her mother's, elders, tired workers in their best Sunday clothes. My fight started in a ballroom, she said, but it continues here in rooms like this, in spaces where people gather to remember who they are before the world tries to forget them. She quoted scripture without preaching. She told stories without performance. And by the end of it, people rose not just to applaud, but to join after the service. A woman approached her, tears lining her cheeks. I used to clean for the Whitmore properties too. I left after what happened to you, I was afraid. But now I think I can speak too. Sarah took her hands. You just did that same week. Sarah's nonprofit, the Second Voice Foundation, held its first national summit held in Detroit. The summit brought together survivors, lawyers, educators, and whistleblowers from across the country. No suits, no stages, just circles of chairs, breakout rooms, chalkboards, and raw honesty. Sarah opened the summit not with a speech, but with a question. What would justice look like if we wrote it ourselves? The answers were bold: fair pay, transparent HR departments, trauma-informed legal support, media training for low-wage workers so they could tell their own stories, and not one person said, revenge, because Sarah had set the tone. She stood in each session, not above anyone, but beside them, listening, nodding, encouraging, a presence. Not a persona. On the final night, attendees gathered in the community center's old gymnasium. The walls were lined with posters from earlier workshops, quotes, goals, dreams. A DJ played soft jazz. People laughed, danced, cried for many. It was the first time in years they'd felt seen near the bleachers. Raymond stood with a soda in one hand, watching Sarah dance with a group of teenage girls. She did it, he murmured to Linda, who stood beside him. No, Linda corrected gently. She's doing it still. Sarah broke away from the group and walked toward them. Her face glowed with sweat and purpose. Raymond nodded at the crowd. This is bigger than any court case. She nodded because courtrooms close, but voices they echo later that night. Alone in her hotel room, Sarah finally allowed herself to rest. The window was open, letting in the scent of spring. She sat at the small desk and opened a fresh notebook. She wrote, I used to be a story people laughed at. Now I'm a story they pass on, and maybe that's how we win. Not with one loud moment, but with 1,000 quiet ones that refuse to die. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. The room was dark, but she no longer feared the shadows. She had become her own light, and she was carrying it forward for everyone still waiting to speak. 2 months after the summit in Detroit, Sarah found herself seated in a modest television studio in Washington, D.C., under the soft glow of makeup lights and the buzz of nervous energy. The host of a major national news show had invited her for a primetime interview. Not about the lawsuit, not about Mike Whitmore, but about leadership, healing, and what came next as the countdown ticked to 0. The red light above the camera blinked on the host. A composed woman named Leona Bryce smiled with a warmth that made the moment feel less like an interrogation and more like an overdue conversation between two women who had fought their own wars in silence tonight. Leona said, "We sit with Sarah John Peter, not just a name behind headlines, but the voice that turns silence into power." Sarah adjusted slightly in her chair, hands resting calmly in her lap. Leona leaned in. "Sarah, so many know the arc of your story, housekeeper turned advocate, the woman who brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees. But who are you now when the lights are off?" Mia smiled softly. "Still someone who folds laundry on Sundays. Still someone who gets nervous before speaking. Still someone learning what it means to live with both wounds and wins." The conversation weaved through her past and into her present, but it was one question that caught even Sarah by surprise. If Mike Whitmore was sitting here now, what would you say to him? Mia hesitated, then looked directly into the camera. "I'd say thank you." The audience hushed, even Leona blinked. "Not because what you did was right," Sarah continued, "but because your cruelty made me find my voice. You underestimated what happens when the people you step on decide they've had enough. You gave me a platform by trying to erase me, and now I'll use that platform to protect others from becoming your next target." The interview aired to millions. It sparked another wave of conversations across social media, workplaces, and dinner tables. More importantly, it inspired a new wave of whistleblowers. A teacher in Nevada, a nurse in Georgia, a young intern at a corporate law firm in Boston. Each one sent letters to Sarah's foundation. Each one ended their message the same way: "Because of you." I spoke. One of the letters came from someone Sarah hadn't expected, a former assistant of Mike's, who had quietly left the company months before the scandal broke. Her name was Clarissa, and in her long, carefully typed message, she admitted she had once participated in silencing complaints. Not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know how to stop. "I thought protecting him was how I kept my job," Clarissa wrote, "but now I understand it only made me complicit. I'm ready to testify. I owe you that Raymond arranged a meeting." Clarissa brought more than testimony, brought documents, memos, emails, calendar entries, internal notes with Mike's initials, confirming hush payments and coercion tactics. It was the missing link. With her help, the state Attorney General's case expanded. Criminal investigations began circling not just Mike, but several senior executives. The Department of Labor launched a separate probe into workplace practices. The reckoning had widened. Beyond Mai was now a systemic audit. Meanwhile, the Second Voice Foundation received a grant from a coalition of philanthropists, enough to expand into 8 cities. Sarah, for the first time in months, allowed herself a quiet moment to celebrate. She invited Raymond and Linda over to her small apartment. Her mother cooked collarded greens and cornbread. They sat around the worn kitchen table, laughter mixing with clinking glasses to justice. Raymond toasted "No." Mia said to the people who speak when it costs them everything. Later that night, after they'd all left, Mia sat on the balcony watching the streetlights blink in rhythm with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed, a message from the teenage girl she'd met at the summit. It read, "Today, I told my principal what my teacher said to me. It was scary, but I remembered your story, and I didn't stay quiet." Sarah replied, "You didn't just speak, you roared." The next morning, she boarded a plane to California for a conference on labor reform. On the flight, a man across the aisle leaned over. "Excuse me?" he said quietly. "Are you Sarah John Peter?" She nodded, unsure. "My sister. She watched you when she was going through her case. You gave her courage. She says thank you, and so do I." Sarah offered a gentle smile. "Then tell her I said, thank you too for listening." As the plane landed and the sun cast long shadows over the tarmac, Sarah felt something shift again. It wasn't just momentum, it was responsibility. Justice didn't end in a courtroom. It didn't end in headlines or handshakes or sound bites. Justice, she knew now, was a living thing. It required tending, repeating, remembering, and her voice, once mocked, once ignored, had become a seed in others, one that wouldn't stop growing. The silence had been broken. Now the echoes were unstoppable. By late autumn, Sarah found herself walking through the marble corridors of Capitol Hill. The echo of her heels against the polished floor was strangely poetic. This same woman, once dismissed in the shadows of wealth and power, was now being escorted into the chamber of a congressional committee. Hearing the session was titled "Workplace Harassment and Corporate Accountability in America." Raymond adjusted his tie nervously. "Just remember, they'll try to talk around the issue. Stay sharp, stay human." Sarah didn't need reminding. She'd learned to recognize rehearsed sympathy, learned how to spot words designed to sound like progress, but mean nothing. What she hadn't expected was the overwhelming number of staffers who stopped her in the hallway, not for photos or autographs, but for gratitude. "You're why I finally filed my own report," whispered a young woman with a notepad. "My mom watched your story and called her old boss, first time in 10 years. She said his name out loud," said another inside the chamber. The lights were unforgiving, the cameras rolling. Sarah took her seat, adjusted the microphone, and met the gaze of 12 representatives, all seated above her, peering down as if from a perch of authority. The chairwoman, a seasoned congresswoman with gray braids and sharp eyes, opened the floor. "Miss John Peter, thank you for joining us. Could you please begin by telling us what brought you here today?" Sarah didn't flinch. "I was mopping a ballroom when a billionaire mistook me for someone he could humiliate. That moment didn't just change my life. It revealed a system that allowed that kind of behavior to thrive unchecked, and I'm here to make sure it ends with me." She spoke without notes. She described the threats, the manipulation, the silence that once choked her voice. She described Linda's courage, the mural in New York, the brick through her window. The girl who roared at one point, a congressman interrupted. "Miss John Peter, would you agree this was an isolated incident?" "No, sir," Sarah said calmly. "It was a symptom. You don't treat symptoms. You cure the disease. The disease is silence, and the cure is policy." Gasps echoed from the rows behind her. Emia leaned into the microphone. "We don't need awareness campaigns, we need consequences. Whistleblower protection, transparent HR practices, real penalties for retaliation. And most of all, we need to believe people when they say, 'I was hurt.'" The session ran over its scheduled time. No one left early by the end. The chairwoman called a recess, then walked down to Sarah directly. "I've served here for 22 years. She said, "Today I took more notes than I have in any hearing." In the last decade that evening, Sarah stood on the steps of the Capitol, the sun setting behind the dome. Raymond stood beside her, silent. "I never thought I'd be here," she said. He shrugged. "You didn't follow a path you made one across the street." News vans were setting up, reporters called her name. Sarah smiled, waved briefly, but didn't stop. She didn't need another headline tonight. She returned to her hotel and found her mother waiting in the lobby holding a shopping bag. "What's this?" Sarah asked. Her mother opened the bag to reveal a pair of polished black heels. "I figured you needed something new." She said, "Those shoes carried you far enough." Hannah, they laughed, full, loud, unburdened laughter for a moment. Sarah was not a symbol or a speaker. She was just a daughter returning from a long day held by the familiar embrace of love and legacy. The next day, she received a call from the Department of Justice. They had concluded their review. Mike Whitmore and 3 former executives were being formally indicted on multiple counts of obstruction, harassment, and witness intimidation. Sarah didn't cheer. She didn't exhale. She just nodded and whispered. Finally, the trial was still months away, but the ripple effects had already begun. Companies nationwide began auditing their HR departments. Several CEOs resigned voluntarily. Sensing the tide had changed, schools invited Ma's nonprofit to help develop new curriculum on ethics in the workplace. One afternoon, during a quiet moment in her office, Linda brought in a stack of letters. "These came for you." Sarah opened the first one. It was from a woman in Ohio, a retired factory worker. "I never told anyone what happened to me in 1974, it read. "But I tell you now because you made it safe." And the next letter was from a young boy in California. "My sister said, 'You're like Harriet Tubman, but for people who mop floors, she's not wrong.'" Sarah closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of being believed. That evening, she sat at her desk and wrote a speech she hadn't planned. It was for a school named after her, Sarah John Peter Community School, set to open next year in New York. Focused on ethics, civic courage, and leadership, she wrote, "They tried to write me out of the room. Instead, I rewrote the room, and now I'm building new ones where every child, every worker, every voice has a seat at the table." And as she signed her name at the bottom, Sarah realized something profound. She hadn't just broken the silence, she had replaced it with voices, with change, with justice that could no longer be ignored. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Sarah John Peter Community School was modest by design. No red carpet, no television cameras, no politicians seeking a soundbite, just folding chairs on the lawn, hand-painted signs made by students, and a makeshift stage built by a local carpenter who refused to take payment. Sarah arrived wearing a navy dress and worn flats. Her mother walked beside her, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. The children lined the path to the school doors, waving paper fans with Sarah's name on them. Some chanted, "Thank you, Miss Sarah." Others simply smiled wide, and knowing inside the school's main hallway, Sarah stopped at the mural that had been painted across the back wall. It depicted a young black woman holding a mop in one hand and a microphone in the other, surrounded by floating pages with words like dignity, truth, and justice beneath it. A quote from Sarah herself. "We do not rise to be seen. We rise because standing tall is the only way to keep walking." Raymond stood in the corner beaming. "You realize," he said, "this school is going to change lives before these kids even know how to spell your name." Sarah chuckled. "Then we're doing it right." She stepped onto the stage to address the crowd. Parents, students, former colleagues, and community leaders. The air smelled of lemonade and fresh paint. Today, she began, we open a building, but more than that, we open a space where truth walks freely, where no child is taught that silence is safer than honesty. She paused, letting the breeze carry her words through the courtyard. "I was told I didn't belong in rooms like this, that I was a distraction, an accident, a mistake. But here's what I learned. Rooms are just walls and ceilings until we decide who deserves to be heard inside them." The applause was gentle, not thunderous. It wasn't a performance, it was communion afterward. Sarah visited each classroom. She bent to tie a child's shoelace, helped another hang a drawing. A little girl tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "When I grow up, I want to be the boss of fairness." "You already are." "Ah," Mia whispered back in her office, the same modest room she insisted on having near the main entrance. Sarah reviewed emails. One in particular made her pause. It was from a woman named Teresa Holloway, an independent journalist known for investigative pieces that exposed corporate abuse. She requested an interview not for a television segment, but for a book. "You're not a headline. Teresa wrote your history. Let's get it right." Sarah agreed. Their meeting spanned weeks. They didn't just talk about Mike or the lawsuit. They talked about childhood identity resilience, what it meant to be raised invisible and choose visibility anyway. Teresa asked tough questions. "Was there ever a moment you wished you had just walked away?" Sarah answered honestly. "Yes, many, but I realized walking away wouldn't make me free. It would just make me quiet, and I'm not quiet anymore." Meanwhile, news broke that Mike Whitmore's trial date had been set for the following spring. His legal team filed motions, tried, delays, attacked. Witness credibility, but the public had already decided something long before the verdict. Sarah didn't attend every pretrial hearing. She had schools to visit, conferences to lead, and laws to help write. A coalition of state representatives had begun working on the John Peter Workplace Reform Bill, proposing sweeping changes to corporate harassment policies and whistleblower protections. Sarah was consulted on every clause one night while reviewing a draft of the bill. She turned to Linda and asked, "Did you ever think it would come to this?" Linda laughed. "I thought we'd get fired. I didn't think we'd change labor law." Sarah grinned. "Same." Despite the progress, shadows lingered online. Hate groups resurfaced, accusing Sarah of being a plant, a fraud, a puppet. She received veiled threats, cryptic letters, digital harassment. But this time she wasn't alone. Each time a threat came in, volunteers from her foundation flagged it, tracked it, reported it. Law enforcement took it seriously. Now people had stopped dismissing fear as paranoia. And then came a surprise. Sarah received an invitation from the Library of Congress. They were adding her original testimony transcript, press clippings, and foundation blueprint to the National Archive of Civic Reform. Her story, they said, had become a cornerstone of modern workplace justice. The ceremony was brief. Sarah didn't speak. She simply stood hand over heart as a librarian placed her file inside a temperature-controlled case. Afterwards, she walked outside, stood on the steps, and took a deep breath. Washington buzzed behind her, but inside she was calm. She thought of Mike's wealth, his threats, his fall, but more importantly, she thought of Malik Clarissa, the girl in the church hat, the janitor at Emory, the students painting her mural, each one a voice, each one, an answer to the question she'd asked herself 1,000 times. Was it worth it? And standing there, watching the sunset bathe the Capitol in gold. Sarah whispered to herself, yes, because justice wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a school named after you, a bill with your fingerprints, a voice that stayed loud, even when the world wanted quiet. It was every room that opened because you dared to knock, and now Sarah wasn't knocking anymore. She was building spring, arrived with no fanfare, just the steady thrum of rain on courthouse windows and a city holding its breath. The trial of Mike Whitmore versus the people began on a gray Monday morning. Reporters lined the steps before sunrise. Protesters held signs quoting Mia's words, while camera crews jostled for angles inside the courtroom. The air was colder, quieter, more clinical. Sarah sat 2 rows. Behind the prosecution, not at the front, not hidden, just present, just watching. She hadn't come to testify this time. That part of her journey was complete. Others had come forward now. Clarissa, the former assistant, took the stand first. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. She read from emails, showed calendar notes, recalled conversations behind closed-door zones where Sarah's name was mocked, where complaints were handled off the record, where hush money was called, courtesy compensation one by one. More voices followed: a hotel supervisor, a human resources employee, a personal driver. They all shared pieces of a puzzle that had once protected a predator and punished the vulnerable Mike. Sat at the defense table, flanked by attorneys. He no longer wore the smug grin of a man, untouchable. His hair grayed, his posture deflated. He didn't look powerful, he looked ordinary. And that perhaps was his worst punishment. The prosecution was meticulous. They didn't rely on emotion. They used facts, patterns, policy failures. Sarah watched it all unfold. Not with vengeance, but with a quiet resolve. This wasn't her reckoning anymore. It belonged to everyone who had once been silenced during a recess. Sarah stepped into the hallway for air. A woman approached mid-40s, clutching a court visitor's badge. I just wanted to say thank you, she whispered. I never said anything when it happened to me, but because of you, I'm here watching healing. Sarah smiled gently. That's all I ever wanted, for us to stop pretending we weren't hurt. Back inside, the defense tried to discredit witnesses called. Character experts played video clips of Mike at charity events, but the jury wasn't moved by photo ops. They listened to the testimony, watched the footage from the ballroom, heard the snide remarks, saw the power imbalance. And then came the closing argument. The prosecutor, a woman named Dana Lockick, turned to the jury with measured grace. This isn't just about one man's cruelty. It's about the systems that let him believe he could act with impunity. It's about the people who were told their pain was inconvenient, and it's about reclaiming the dignity of those whose names were almost forgotten. Today we remember those names, starting with Sarah John. Peter, the courtroom held its breath. Sarah felt her heart still. She hadn't expected that. When the jury returned after 2 days of deliberation, their verdict was swift guilty on all counts. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She simply whispered, good. Mike was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison with additional civil penalties that dismantled much of his financial empire. For many, it was closure. For Sarah, it was something different, not an ending, but a clearing. That evening, Raymond and Linda joined her on the rooftop of a small bistro overlooking the city skyline. They shared a bottle of sparkling cider, watched the lights blink like fireflies. You did it, Linda said. No, Sarah replied. We did it, all of us, every person who spoke, every person who stood beside someone who couldn't. Raymond raised his glass to the echo that never stopped. Sarah clinked glasses with them to the rooms we built from rubble. The next morning, Mia visited the community center in her neighborhood. It had just reopened after renovations funded in part by a grant from her foundation. She walked through the halls, listening to children read aloud in the library, seniors playing chess in the common room. On the wall, a new plaque read, in honor of those who dared to speak. When silence was safer, a staff member handed Mia a visitor badge out of habit. Sarah chuckled and clipped it on. Anyway, humility, after all, was part of the journey. That afternoon, Sarah returned home and found a box on her doorstep. No return address inside, was a single item. Her old name tag from the Whitmore Hotel, still smudged, still slightly bent attached, was a note unsigned. It read, "You were always more than this." Sarah sat on her porch, name tag in hand, the weight of it both haunting and healing. She didn't need to know who sent it. She already knew what it meant that night. She wrote in her journal, "Justice is not the absence of pain, it's the presence of truth and the courage to walk with it even when the world says sit down." She closed the book, turned out the light, and let the silence settle, not as a threat, but as a promise, a space where new stories would one day begin. Stories not of what was lost, but of all that was reclaimed. Summer returned to the city with the warmth of old music and blooming windowsills. The Sarah John Peter Community School had completed its first academic year. Graduation day was humbler potluck-style picnic on the school lawn, with families bringing dishes from every corner of the community. Fried chicken, tamila lasagna, samosas, and peach cobbler filled the folding tables, a mosaic of cultures and resilience. Sarah stood under a canopy of string lights hung by volunteers the night before her speech was short, and no one expected it to be otherwise. Today, she said, holding a hand to her chest, is not about my name on a wall, it's about your names in the world. The world will not always welcome you, but bring your own table, invite others, and build without waiting for permission. The crowd erupted. Not in wild cheers, but in something deeper. Nods, tears, people clasping each other's shoulders. Not out of ceremony, but out of understanding. After the ceremony, an elderly man approached. He introduced himself as a retired bus driver. "I've watched you for years now," he said, "and I still can't believe the world changed because a janitor refused to shrink." Ma smiled. "It didn't change because of me. It changed because we stopped pretending injustice was someone else's business." That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, the same one she'd lived in for years, despite offers of penthouses and media deals. She brewed a cup of chamomile tea and stepped onto the balcony across the street. The community garden flickered with solar lights, and children ran barefoot in the twilight. She sat with her journal, the one that had accompanied her through every chapter of this long journey. Tonight she opened to a blank page. She didn't need to write a speech or statement, just something simple. She wrote, "Peace is not a pause. It's a place you reach when the noise can't change who you are anymore." The next morning, she received a call from a university in New York. They wanted her to consider a teaching fellowship, not honorary, not symbolic. A semester-long seminar titled Voices from the Margins, Speaking Power. She laughed, not out of disbelief, but out of the sheer beauty of irony. Once she'd been mocked for having no formal education. Now she was being asked to help write the curriculum. She said yes. She arrived at the university in late August. The class was full by the second week. Her syllabus included voices. History had tried to bury Black lorises who organized unions, Latina farm workers who fought for wage rights, Asian nurses who led safety protests, and trans bus drivers who redefined labor visibility. Each class began the same way, with Sarah asking a question, "Who gets to write history?" And each session ended the same way, with the students answering, "We do." She wore no robe, no fancy glasses, just her self-braided hair, sensible shoes, and a small gold necklace engraved with the word unheard. At semester's end, the students threw a surprise celebration. They presented her with a hand-bound book filled with personal essays. One line written by a student named Jess read, "You didn't just teach us how to speak, you taught us how to listen to our own silence." In December, Mia returned home for the holidays. The school hosted a winter fair. Children sang carols off. Key parents danced with mittens on, and Sarah served hot cocoa to anyone who came near her table. Later that night, she walked the empty halls alone. She paused at the mural again, now worn slightly with time, but more beautiful for it. She touched the painted hand holding the microphone and whispered, "Thank you." The next day, she visited Mike Whitmore's old corporate tower. Now empty, the property had been sold, repurposed for a public health center. She didn't go inside. She didn't need to, standing outside. She looked at the building one last time and said nothing, because some chapters didn't need closure, just distance on her way home. She passed by a bookstore. In the window was a single copy of the biography Teresa Holloway had written, Echo, the Story of Sarah. John Peter. Sarah hadn't wanted the book to be titled after her, but Teresa insisted because your name gave others permission to believe in their own. She stepped inside, signed the inside cover, and left the copy unsigned as always for whoever needs to remember they're not alone. Years passed, and Sarah continued to teach, to mentor, to build. She never ran for office, never accepted honorary doctorates. She turned down movie rights. She kept her phone number the same. She made lasagna every Sunday, and every now and then she still got letters from strangers, from daughters, from janitors, from CEOs learning how to unlearn one letter. Years later stood out, it read, "My mother told me she met you once when she was young and afraid she said you didn't tell her to be brave. You just reminded her she already was. She died last year. But she never forgot your name. Now I carry it forward." Sarah folded the letter gently, placed it in a box labeled Echoes. She sat by the window, steam curling from her tea, and watched the world go by outside. Someone was sweeping the sidewalk, a teenage girl, hair in a bun, headphones in, moving like the whole street was a dance floor. Sarah smiled because justice had never been about titles or trials or buildings with her name. It had always been about that girl, every boy, every person who decided they mattered. No matter what the world tried to say, she closed her eyes not to forget.